Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Miyabi is arguably the most anticipated character since Zenless Zone Zero's release, and boy does she have big ears to fill. You'll learn everything you need to know about Miyabi in today's ultimate guide video. So what do George Costanza's temper, your neighbor's weird garden gnomes, and Miyabi all have in common? They're all comically short. But fear not, because Miyabi does everything besides fall short of expectations. This video was filmed on the early access server and is not indicative of the final product. There may be some changes on release, so be sure to check the comments down below to see if there are any. In this video, we'll go over her kit, her drives and stats, Wenjins, Mindscapes, teams, which will include some bangus as well, a showcase, and of course, my opinion at the end. Miyabi is a Frost Anomaly agent who actually focuses more on crit damage, making her incredibly unique, defying both class and elemental expectations. Miyabi's kit is quite the doozy, so let's slash right into it. Regular basic attack Kazaha deals physical damage for the first 2 hits, with the 3rd, 4th, and 5th hits dealing frost damage. And don't worry, I'll have a full section explaining frost in a bit. In particular, the 4th and 5th hits of her basic attack string are pretty solid, applying a good amount of anomaly. Miyabi also has a charged attack, Shimotsuki, where you simply hold down the basic attack button for her to start consuming her blue balls, aka Fallen Frosts. Consuming 2 balls leads to Shimotsuki level 1, consuming 4 leads to Shimotsuki level 2, and consuming 6 Fallen Frosts leads to her massive 4282.8% multiplier. Not only that, but her additional ability, which is activated by having another character from section 6 or a support character on her team, provides Shimotsuki with 60% bonus damage and after a teammate triggers disorder, 30% ice resistance penetration. As we can see, her kit revolves around her level 3 Shimotsukis and generating Fallen Frost. Now before we move on to actually generating Fallen Frost, we need to go over what the Frost element is. Frost is the cooler older brother of Ice, and counts as ice damage. Like Ice, when Miyabi fills up the Frost element anomaly, the enemy will be frozen and can be shattered when they unfreeze. Shatter in this case actually working the same way as Ice's Shatter with its damage scaling off of anomaly proficiency instead of crit. However, Miyabi's Frost will also sometimes deal an instance of Frostburn Break damage. Frostburn Break's damage scales off of the level of her core skill and Miyabi's attack stat, and it can crit, but it doesn't scale off of anomaly proficiency. Also, now the enemy is under Frostburn state, which increases the amount of anomaly applied to the enemy by 20% and lasts for 20 seconds. Just like the other elements, Frost can be disordered with, I believe, the following formula, although this formula might need to be further verified. This is what I have seen from my limited testing. Oddly enough, because Frostburn lasts for 20 seconds on the enemy, this actually gives the Frost Disorder the largest base multipliers out of any disorder, because why the heck not? Even though her damage doesn't center around disorder, Miyabi is clearly Zenless Zone Zero's golden child. Very importantly, Frost and Ice count as 2 separate anomalies being applied to the enemy, and thus can actually trigger disorders for each other, making Ice characters like Lycon and Sokaku great teammates for Miyabi. Now this next part is very confusing, but basically, before you Frostburn the enemy, Miyabi gains 1-to-1 anomaly application rate based on her crit rate for up to 80% additional anomaly application rate, so you really want to build crit rate on her for her to apply Frost as fast as possible. However, when the enemy takes Frostburn damage, this additional anomaly application scaling off of her crit actually goes away, and the enemy can no longer take Frostburn Break damage while the enemy is in a Frostburn state. You actually need to apply another anomaly to the enemy to remove Frostburn state in order to trigger Frostburn Break again, and for Miyabi to gain that additional anomaly application based off of her crit rate. Yes, this is honestly pretty confusing, but the too long didn't read version of this is first build crit rate on Miyabi. In combat, apply Frost, then apply a different element to trigger disorder, and repeat that. Now why are Frostburn Break and disorders important besides the damage that they do? That's right, they generate Fallen Frosts. Frostbite Break damage gives 1 Fallen Frost, and Disorder gives 2 Fallen Frost via her additional ability. Moving on, we have her EX specials. with both parts of it giving 2 Fallen Frosts for 40 energy each. Whether you do EX1 or EX1 plus EX2, Miyabi can follow either of these EX specials up with her B3, which conveniently skips her useless B1 and B2. For most situations, I find myself mainly using her EX1 B3 to B5 in order to apply a lot of additional anomaly per energy spent. However, EX1 plus EX2 definitely has its uses, generating more Fallen Frosts per time spent, as well as EX2 being swap cancelable. Now Miyabi's quick assist is also quite solid, as she can follow it up with B4 and B5, reaching the much more rewarding parts of her basic attack string. And finally, Miyabi's ultimate generates 3 Fallen Frosts as well as doing a ton of damage. And it gives 30% ice damage for 12 seconds for good measure. Looking at her full kit details, we can see that her EX specials have great parameters across the board, outputting good DPS and are her best sources for anomaly application, on top of generating 2 Fallen Frosts each. As expected though, her Shimotsuki slash has some comical multipliers and very high DPS, and these numbers don't include the 60% bonus damage and Ice Pen from her additional ability. It's worth noting that her B5, EX2, and especially her Shimotsuki level 3 take a long time to execute and are fully swap cancelable, so don't be afraid to swap cancel these to her allies, especially to support characters who can quick assist her back on very quickly. Speaking of which, her quick assist and dodge counter also follow up with B4, making them great options for skipping B1 and B2, and thus applying a lot of additional anomaly. As for rotations, Miyabi is a very dynamic character, with situations varying substantially for her Fallen Frost generation. However, here are a few quick sample rotations. At the beginning of a fight, Miyabi starts off with 3 Fallen Frosts. With a quick EX special applying Frostburn, she can immediately perform a level 3 Shimotsuki slash. Now that she has 0 Fallen Frost, Miyabi can apply Frostburn to the enemy while using her EX special once. This puts her at 3 Fallen Frosts. Then an ally can activate Disorder, which puts her at 5, and now Miyabi can use another EX special to get to 6, where she can use Shimotsuki level 3 again. Then the final rotation where I often find myself doing is where she starts as 0 Fallen Frost, but she uses her ultimate, which gives her 3 Fallen Frost, and with an EX special and applying Frostburn, she's at 6 again, where you can use Shimotsuki level 3. As for her talent priority, looking at her damage distribution, I highly recommend leveling her basics above all else. Then after that, I would level her chain and her core, and then her EX special, and after that, her assists and dodge. Alright, we've made it to the calculations portions for Miyabi, and let me just say it was quite the doozy, and she is one of the most it depends-itis characters in the entire game. Now with that being said though, fortunately Miyabi is just so strong at the baseline, you know, if your build's not optimized, it's really not a huge deal. She's just going to do a ton of damage. So despite everything I'm about to tell you, don't worry too much about it as long as you follow some general guidelines. Now first of all, let's talk a bit about her crit rate and the part of her core passive where she gains additional anomaly application based on her crit rate. Because of this passive, she definitely strongly benefits from going up to at least 80% crit rate in order to maximize her frost anomaly application. We do have a few common setups, starting off with the 4-piece branch and blade song. This thing does provide you 12% crit rate, as well as let's say you use a slot 4 crit rate main stat. We can see that her base crit rate is at 41%, and the number of crit rate rolls needed to reach 80% plus is going to be pretty rough at 17 crit rate rolls, which means over 3 crit rate rolls per piece, which basically makes this essentially not really reasonable to reach 81.8% crit rate. Now this next setup is once we add the 2-piece Woodpecker Electro, which gives 8% crit rate. We can see now that the base crit rate is now at 49%, and we will need 13 crit rate rolls in order to reach 80% plus, which is definitely a bit challenging, but it is, you know, going to be the common free-to-play friendly setup because, you know, a lot of you guys won't have the signature Wenjin. There's a good chance you won't reach 80% crit rate, and it's fine, right? It's not going to be a huge deal. There's going to be a few situations where you may need to do an additional basic attack or two in order to actually apply Frost Anomaly, but overall, not the biggest deal in the world. And finally, we can see that once we slap on her signature Wenjin, which provides a 24% crit rate, now we are at a whopping base 73% crit rate, which means we only need 3 crit rate rolls to reach over 80%. Although you can definitely, you know, swap out some things here in order to still reach 80% crit rate. And it's also worth noting that going above 80% crit rate is perfectly fine, all the way up until at least 100% crit rate, where obviously after 100% crit rate, it's going to be a pretty wasted stat. Now Now also keep in mind that this crit rate right here that you're seeing does not include the 12% additional potential crit rate once you trigger freeze or shatter provided by the 4-piece branch and blade song. So we can see here that we are actually overcapping on crit rate right here after we add in that 12%. On top of that, the crit damage stat that you're seeing here does not include the passive from this, as well as from the 4-piece set bonus from the branch and blade song as well. So there is also that to keep in mind as well. So in terms of Miyabi's drives, this discussion actually gets a bit contentious from what I've seen in the theory crafting circles, but I'm going to provide you my opinion as well as to tell you, honestly, don't stress too much about it, but here's my general advice. Now, the first thing to note about this chart is that it does not factor in any attack buffs from allies, so attack related things will overperform by a bit, because once you throw in a character like Sokaku or Caesar or Lucy to support Miyabi, well, obviously it's going to dilute any potential attack buffs that she might get. So there is that to just keep in mind when you kind of look at this. Now, starting off, the cookie cutter build that I think most players are going to use is going to be the 4-piece branch and blade song plus the 2-piece woodpecker plus slot 4 crit rate, ice damage slot 5, and slot 6 attack percent. And this is a nice combination of bonus damage as well as attack percent, as well as, obviously crit rate in order to help her reach that 80% crit ratio. But there are, of course, alternative options. For example, using an attack percent piece in slot 5 is perfectly viable because Miyabi definitely has a decent amount of bonus damage built into her kit. But again, this will be a little bit worse with an attack buffing support, like for example Sokaku. Now up next, we have the slot 4 attack percent, and in particular, this is going to be better with her signature Wenjin. And up next, we have Anomaly Mastery in slot 6, and generally this is a pretty big damage loss because Miyabi, as you can see, doesn't really have any issues applying frost onto the enemy due to her, well, 80%-ish additional frost application, which is just absolutely massive. And it's also worth noting that Miyabi does not need Anomaly Mastery in slot 6 in order to reach 115 Anomaly Mastery for the 4-piece branch and blade, because she just happens to have 116 Anomaly Mastery at a baseline. So up next, we can replace the woodpecker with the 2-piece hormone punk, especially in setups where you have over 80% crit rate. So, I put a little asterisk here because, basically if you don't have 80% crit rate, I would recommend the woodpecker electro. If you do have like 88% plus, then I would recommend the hormone punk. Now, of course, interestingly enough, Miyabi also does scale reasonably well, like not great, but reasonably well off of anomaly proficiency. And we can see that is not a huge DPS loss to slot anomaly proficiency. But I'm actually going to bump this down 1 star because, yeah, it's not really a damage increase in this case. In most situations, it's just going to be a damage loss. And the 2-piece polar metal is perfectly good as well. Finally, Puffer Electro, same story. And Puffer Electro performs a little bit better with Rena as well. Now, in terms of the main set, the 4-piece set, the 4-piece Woodpecker Electro in theory should be pretty competitive to the 4-piece Branch and Blade Song. But again, if you use her with, for example, Sokaku, it's going to be a bit worse with attack buffers because of the flat attack dilution. With all that yapping about, oh, what if you did use her with an attack buffer, here is a chart where I did include Sokaku's buffs. And we can see, just like I expected, the attack percent stuff is not really overperforming in comparison to the standard crit rate, ice damage, attack percent slot 6. Anyway, it's hard to go wrong with most of these combinations that are like 98% plus, so don't worry too much about it. When it comes to the substats, it's as you expect. You want to prioritize crit, especially until you manage to get 80% crit rate, as well as to maintain that 1-to-2 crit ratio if possible, and then attack percent is going to be great as well. And then after that, we have anomaly proficiency, flat pen, and flat attack, which are all nice bonuses to have. Up next, we have Miyabi's Wenjins, starting off with her signature Wenjin, the Hailstorm Shrine. This thing is obviously just very, very, very good with high base attack, as well as a bunch of crit value on it, providing crit rate and crit damage, and even providing up to 40% ice damage, which is absolutely insane, to be completely honest. Now, overall, in my opinion, the next best option also happens to be her next best free-to-play friendly option, which is the Rainforest Gourmet. It really depends on how many stacks you have it at. There are some situations where you're going to be able to have it at around 6 stacks on average, I would say, tends to be what I was noticing when I used this thing. And at 6 stacks, it's at a modest 81%, which honestly isn't too terrible, but there are definitely going to be situations where you're at, for example, 4 stacks average, or even potentially lower, where now this weapon is falling far, far behind. Now, with that being said, honestly, none of the other Wenjins really stand out to me. I will quickly mention the Fusion Compiler. I personally don't like it because building stacks on this thing is cumbersome. It means that you have to use Miyabi's extremely, essentially useless regular special attacks, or you have to drain all her energy on her EX specials in order to literally just do her regular special attacks a couple of times to build the stacks on this thing, which I personally don't really recommend. So I did do the calculations with Sokaku as well, and now we can see that the Rainforest Gourmet is falling even further behind. So there is that to keep in mind, especially if you do plan to use Miyabi with Sokaku. Let's blitz through some quick teams for Miyabi, starting with one of my personal favorite free-to-play friendly teams if you do have Lycon, which a lot of people don't, a lot of people do. This team felt really good to use, especially from a free-to-play perspective, because Lycon is a great stunner, and Sokaku provides massive buffs, and then between Lycon as well as Sokaku, they are able to apply Ice Anomaly in order to disorder Miyabi's Frostburn off of the enemy. And another cool little tip is that you can absolutely use Freedom Blues on either Sokaku or even Lycon in order to actually apply even more Ice Anomaly, whether it's for Sokaku and Lycon or whether it's for Miyabi's Frost Anomaly application. At least I'm about 90% sure that the Freedom Blues affects Frost Anomaly application. Sorry guys, I didn't personally test this, but some of my friends said that it does. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt. And we have another free-to-play friendly team, especially if you don't have Lycon. Now Piper, of course, doesn't get her additional ability here in this team, which we can see, which you lose about 18% bonus damage or whatever. It's not that huge of a deal, but Piper's mainly here just to trigger Disorder. And up next is definitely going to be a fan favorite team for Miyabi owners. It's going to be Miyabi, Yanagi, plus Sokaku, a full section 6 team. And Yanagi in particular is extremely good with Miyabi because her polarity disorders actually count as a disorder for Miyabi. Therefore, when Yanagi uses her EX special, Miyabi actually gains 2 Fallen Frosts. So Yanagi is just has great synergy with Miyabi for that reason. And of course, Sokaku is Sokaku. Now, just to further kind of reinforce why Miyabi is a surprisingly flexible character is that you can even slot in Caesar, because Caesar just needs a character with defensive assist on the team to trigger her thing. And obviously all 3 of them will be activated, and Caesar can buff both of their damage as well as to provide a decent amount of stun to the enemy, making this team also a very, very powerful option. And a really cool and I guess hot team is Miyabi plus Lighter plus Lucy. I personally had a lot of fun with this team. Now, Lucy, of course, provides a lot of attack, especially with Lucy's signature Wenjin. And Lighter, of course, just provides massive, massive ice damage buffs, which Miyabi can definitely take advantage of. We've reached Miyabi's Mindscapes. Now, if you're to ask me, should you get her signature Wenjin or her Mindscape 1? Personally, especially if you don't go for her Mindscape 2, I would just go for her signature Wenjin. Now, when it comes to her Mindscape 1, basically it helps her alleviate a bit of team building because she doesn't need as many disorders, because now her Shimotsuki level 3 will actually remove Frostburn from the enemy, which makes it more easy for Miyabi to, not rely on disorders. But she still is missing out on some Fallen Frost generation. So in comes Mindscape 2, which gives a ton of stuff, crit rate, and some bonus damage to her basic attacks, but also you start off with 6 Fallen Frost, allowing you to instantly use her level 3 Shimotsuki, as well as you get 1 additional Fallen Frost per B5 that you do, which just makes this an absolutely outrageous Mindscape. You can absolutely expect for most situations that you will get an additional Shimotsuki level 3 slash within about 30 seconds or so because of the additional Fallen Frost generated. Now, M3 gives 2 talent levels, M4 gives 30% more damage to her Frostburn core passive damage, as well as more decibels. M5 also gives plus 2 talent levels, and M6 is, pretty busted. Basically, she'll autocast part 1 of Shimotsuki as well as part 2 of Shimotsuki while you're charging up all the way up to part 3 of Shimotsuki in order to do massive, massive damage. So yeah, Miyabi is definitely going to be very great for whales out there. Alright, let's take a look at a few quick showcases now. I have to be 100% honest, because this is Shiyu 7-2. I had to run through the first half each time, and therefore, I really couldn't do as many runs as I would have liked in order to test these teams as much as I wanted to, but there were just so many teams to test for her, and it just, some of these runs are some of the earlier runs of my attempts as well, so, still learning a lot of stuff. So please, 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 as always, take any of these runs comparisons, if you do compare them, which I personally don't, really use these as comparisons, to with a big grain of salt, because yeah, they're far from accurate. These runs are always anecdotal as always, and I feel like I always have to give this giant disclaimer because a lot of people always take this stuff very seriously. So yeah, anyway, right off the bat though, you can see that in the first wave, Miyabi was able to just clear it with a massive Shimotsuki level 3 slash, which is just absolutely devastating. The AoE on it is just, comically outrageous too. And in this case, we actually got a bit lucky with the timing of the freeze anomaly, because freeze doesn't last very long on the enemy. However, we were still able to trigger Disorder via Miyabi's ultimate there, which actually allowed us to immediately use Shimotsuki level 3 right after that. So that is just like a neat little thing for the rotation that I didn't include, is that if your ultimate triggers a Disorder as well as, it's likely going to be triggering Frostburn as well, you will actually be able to get 6 instantly. So yeah, there's a lot of additional little combinations in terms of when it comes to, Miyabi getting 6 for her Shimotsuki slash. Now up next, the next team is an even more free-to-play friendly team. Now both these teams were using free-to-play friendly Wenjins, 4-star Wenjins, and this team is also no exception. Now me personally, I think this team, you definitely notice a big difference if you just replace Lycon with Piper instead, because now you're working with 3 anomaly gauges instead of both Piper and Sokaku working on the same anomaly gauge, which means it's much more difficult to, to apply the proper disorder that you actually want. So there is a big difference. Miyabi is highly recommended to be used with at least one other 5-star character in my opinion, but still, she's still gonna be an insane character in comparison to most of the cast, even with, for example, a character like Piper who doesn't really have the best synergy with Miyabi. I mean, let's be completely honest here. But yeah, still, so we are less focused on trying to stun the enemy, obviously, and instead we are more focused on just trying to do some raw anomaly damage and eventually perhaps stunning the enemy, and just, trying to swap between physical as well as frost anomaly in order to proc those disorders and to remove frostburn. I don't think the enemy actually has frostburn on it. And I think we actually got, I'm not even sure what's going on. I wasn't paying attention to which disorders going on, which disorders happening at which time, but yeah. So either way though, we can see big damage once the enemy is stunned. It just took much longer to actually stun the enemy in order to, finish it off during its stun window with this team. So yeah, it's viable, and we still cleared this in like 1 minute and 20 seconds in comparison to other free-to-play teams, which are, definitely going to take a lot longer for something like this, especially in an ice weak chamber like this one. So anyway, up next we have a Caesar plus Yanagi team. We just popped Caesar's, shield right before the fight actually starts, and then we are, wipe the first wave as always. But then we are up against this dude here. Now, interestingly, we can utilize this Yanagi's thing in order to provide Miyabi the level 3 Shimotsuki slashes, where we can now swap Yanagi back on the field in order for her to be productive and to start applying the electric anomaly in order to trigger that disorder. So we've done the disorder, and now I think I'm building up a little bit of additional gauge. Now, because we don't have an active stunner, and I decided I'm just going to try to focus on applying anomalies more so than focusing on stunning the enemy. You can see here that we took a different approach. We were just doing raw damage without relying on the stun, and well, this team is chopping it up way faster than the free-to-play Piper team, but it's still, yeah, she just basically needs a single cycle against the bosses in order to take them out. Now, this team is a lot of fun for some reason. I just find Lighter to be such a fun character for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's just his super fast flurry of punches and how fast he just goes in and punches your enemy's faces. Lighter's a very satisfying character to use. But yeah, so just like that, bam, right? He just punches the enemy's face. But yeah, massive ice buffs along with increased stun duration window, along with ice resistance shred with Lighter. Now this team certainly super unoptimized, and I think actually running the Freedom Blues on Lucy might actually be a bit better to improve the fire anomaly application, but I literally only did one run with this team to just kind of demonstrate proof of concept and make sure that the team felt reasonable to use. And you can see here, I'm actually using Lighter's chain attack specifically to apply fire disorder in order to activate the disorder for Miyabi. So yeah, just like a little thing that, you know, I was kind of forced to do because I didn't have Freedom Blues. But you can see here, there's just so many great teams for Miyabi, and she is just such an incredible character. Needless to say, I think she does power creep a lot of the cast. She's, in my opinion, the best DPS character as of release, and I think she's going to be the new baseline for DPS characters, where new DPS characters are going to have to live up to Miyabi, or else they're just not going to be a great character. And also, I want to apologize. I realized pretty late into this video that I've been saying Miyabi's name wrong. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that, but yeah, I've always been terrible at pronunciation, so please forgive me. Please don't unsub. Speaking of which, yeah, be sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this video. You know, I put in a lot of work into these, if you can't tell, and hopefully you've learned what you need to know about Miyabi, sorry, I'm still not saying her name correctly, and leave any questions and comments down below, and hopefully someone can answer them or respond to them appropriately. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.